You think you know who's in control, but trust me, you don't. Officer Blake's voice echoed through the courtroom as he sneered at the woman entering. The room fell silent, all eyes on her. Tasha Williams, a woman who had been invisible to most. But now, she stood before them, calm, composed, and unshaken. As she walked down the aisle, her eyes met Officer Blake's. He scoffed, eyes narrowed with disdain. Well, what do we have here? His voice was dripping with mockery, and the others in the room chuckled along with him. Tasha didn't flinch. She didn't let his words pierce her armor. This wasn't the first time someone underestimated her, and it wouldn't be the last. She had learned long ago how to let their words roll off her like water off a duck's back. She had to. Life had taught her that much. She was the woman who cleaned up after others, the one who was never seen or heard. But today was different. Tasha had a secret, one that no one in this room would ever guess. Officer Blake certainly didn't know. His arrogant smile stretched wider as he watched her quietly take her seat in the back of the room. The same seat she had occupied countless times before, cleaning up messes no one else wanted to. What he didn't realize was that she was the one who was about to clean up his mess. As the trial began, Officer Blake was in his element. He dominated the room, his sharp words cutting through the air. He made a few snide remarks in Tasha's direction, and the crowd responded with light laughter, feeding his ego. But Tasha stayed silent. She was waiting. She knew something they didn't. Something that could change everything. When the judge called for a brief recess, Tasha stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. Officer Blake's gaze followed her, his eyes narrowing. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Tasha didn't answer him, but as she walked past him, she whispered, "You'll find out soon enough." Officer Blake scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. He knew she was just a janitor. No one would care if she walked out. But what he didn't know was that this was her courtroom too. Just as Tasha stepped out into the hallway, she felt a presence behind her. Officer Blake had followed her. He was getting curious now, maybe even a little worried. "You're not supposed to be out here," he said, trying to intimidate her. Tasha turned around slowly, a slight smile on her lips. "Is that so?" she asked, her voice calm. "Well, maybe it's time someone tells you the truth." Officer Blake's confidence faltered as she stood taller than he had ever seen her. He knew he had crossed a line, but he didn't know just how far she had come. He watched as Tasha reached into her bag and pulled out an official-looking document. She held it out in front of him. He took it from her hand, the paper feeling heavy with significance. As he read the words, his face drained of color. He started, but his voice caught in his throat. "Yes," Tasha interrupted him. "I'm your new boss." The words hung in the air like a bombshell. Officer Blake's mouth went dry. He had been standing here, mocking a woman he had thought was beneath him. And now, he realized that she wasn't just anyone. She was the new police chief. His police chief. His heart raced as the room around him seemed to spin. His mind raced to understand how he had failed to see this coming. How he had been so blind to the woman standing right in front of him. The one he had belittled. The one he had dismissed. She wasn't just cleaning up after others. She was about to clean up the entire department. And he was the one who was about to be swept away. Tasha watched him struggle with the realization. She could see the fear, the regret. It was a look she had seen before in the eyes of people who thought they were untouchable. But she was about to change all that. "I've worked harder than you can imagine," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "And I've earned every bit of this position." Officer Blake opened his mouth to protest, but Tasha cut him off. "You don't get to decide who's worthy. Not anymore." She turned to walk away, the sound of her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Officer Blake stood there, frozen, the document still in his hand, the weight of it now heavier than ever. He had underestimated her. And now, the consequences of that mistake were staring him in the face. As Tasha stepped back into the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted. Officer Blake stood motionless, the weight of her revelation still hanging in the air. His mind raced, his body frozen in disbelief. How had this happened? He had no idea that the woman he had treated with such disdain was not just a simple janitor. He hadn't even given her a second thought, and now, she was his superior. The room, which had once seemed so full of confidence, now felt oppressive, the walls closing in on him. The whispers started, subtle at first, but growing louder as people began to realize what had just occurred. Tasha, however, remained unfazed. Her eyes locked with Blake's, her gaze steady and unwavering. She had always known this moment would come, but she had never imagined it would feel like this. As she walked back to her seat, her heels clicking sharply on the floor, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. This was her moment. This was the time when everything changed. She sat down slowly, her posture impeccable, and waited for the storm to hit. Officer Blake's face flushed as the realization continued to sink in. He glanced around the room, looking for something, anything, to ground him, but there was nothing. He was standing at the precipice, and the only thing he could do now was step forward. But how could he? How could he face the truth of what he had done? The trial resumed, but Blake's mind wasn't on the case anymore. He couldn't focus on the lawyers, the witnesses, or even the judge. All he could see was Tasha. She was there, sitting so calmly, so confidently, as if she had always known she would be in this position. It was a sharp contrast to how he felt, like a man who had just been exposed for all his weaknesses. His heart pounded in his chest as the trial continued, his thoughts swirling. How had he let this happen? How had he let her slip through his fingers, so close yet so far? He thought about the times he had mocked her, the way he had looked down on her without a second thought. And now, here she was, the very woman he had ridiculed, in a position of power, watching him, judging him. As the session broke for lunch, Blake remained in his seat, his mind spinning. He couldn't get the image of Tasha out of his head. He had underestimated her, and now he was going to pay the price. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, drawing the attention of the other people in the room. He needed to talk to someone, anyone. But who? He couldn't go to his colleagues. They would think he was weak. He couldn't go to his superiors. They were the ones who had failed him. The only person he could turn to was Tasha. She was the one who had seen through him, the one who had shown him the truth he had been so desperately avoiding. He left the courtroom, his steps heavy, and walked down the long hallway to the staff elevator. He wasn't sure what he was going to say to her, or how he would even begin to explain himself. But he had to try. As he reached the elevator, he saw Tasha standing by the doors, her expression unreadable. She wasn't looking at him, but he could feel her gaze on him, as if she were already weighing his every move. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Tasha," he said, his voice steady but uncertain. She didn't respond, but he could see her shoulders tense. I owe you an apology," he continued, his voice growing softer. "I was wrong. I treated you like you were nothing. I didn't see you for who you really are." Tasha turned to face him then, her expression still calm, but with a hint of something else, something that seemed almost like pity. "You didn't see me because you weren't looking," she said quietly. "You saw a woman who cleaned the floors, and you thought that was all I was. But there's more to me than that, Blake. There's more to all of us than what we show on the surface." Blake felt the sting of her words, but it was nothing compared to what he had been feeling all day. "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I'm sorry for what I did. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I understand now. I see you, and I see myself too." There was a long pause, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the hum of the elevator in the background. Then, Tasha finally spoke again. "It's not about forgiveness, Blake," she said, her voice firm. "It's about understanding. And you can't just see me now and think that makes everything okay. This is the start of a long road, for both of us." Blake nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. "I know," he said quietly, "but I'm ready to start that road. If you'll have me." Tasha didn't answer right away. She simply stared at him, her gaze piercing, as if searching for something deep inside him. After a long moment, she finally nodded. "I'll have you," she said, "but only if you're willing to do the work, to really see people, to really listen. That's the only way we'll move forward. Together." Blake swallowed hard, the enormity of her words sinking in. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. A path that might lead to redemption. A path that might lead to something better. He stepped into the elevator, and Tasha followed, the doors closing behind them. It was the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. One that would be shaped by respect, understanding, and the courage to change. The days following Tasha's quiet confrontation with Officer Blake were filled with tension, but also a quiet, unspoken shift. Blake had walked away from the elevator that day with a weight on his shoulders he couldn't shake off. His mind, once so sharp, now felt clouded with uncertainty. For years, He had lived a life where power came from his badge, from his authority over others. But Tasha had taken that from him in a single moment, not with force, but with truth. It had unsettled him in a way he hadn't expected. The next morning, Blake found himself walking through the halls of the department with a sense of unease. The other officers he passed nodded at him, but there was something different in their gaze. They weren't looking at him with the same respect as before. They had all witnessed what had happened in the courtroom. They had seen Tasha's quiet strength, and now they were beginning to see him for what he truly was, a man who had lost his way. Tasha, on the other hand, had settled into her new role with a sense of calm authority. She had spent years working in the shadows, cleaning up after others, but now she was the one in charge. The department, once so distant and impersonal, now felt like a place where she could make a difference. She had known this moment would come, but even she hadn't realized how quickly it would change things. Tasha wasn't interested in power for the sake of power. She didn't care about the prestige or the control it might bring. What mattered to her was the people, the ones who had been overlooked, dismissed, and forgotten. She had been one of them. But now, she had the chance to make sure no one else had to endure what she had. As she walked into her new office, she felt the weight of the responsibility settle over her. She wasn't just there to lead, she was there to change. Blake, still reeling from the events of the previous day, couldn't get Tasha out of his mind. He had apologized, but it didn't feel like enough. He knew that words alone wouldn't fix what he had done. He had to prove that he was capable of change. He had to show her that he could be more than the man she had once seen him as. But how? He wasn't sure. He had never been good at this, at reaching out to people, at showing vulnerability. But he knew one thing. He couldn't stay the man he had been. He had to do better. The days passed, and Blake found himself in Tasha's office more often than he would have liked. At first, it had been to discuss official matters, reports, and schedules. But as time went on, those conversations became more personal. He found himself opening up to her in ways he never thought possible. He spoke about his past, about the mistakes he had made, about the things he had done to hold on to power. Tasha listened, always calm, never judgmental. And slowly, Blake began to feel the weight of his own actions lift. It wasn't easy. It never would be. But it was a start. Tasha, for her part, had always believed in the power of listening. She knew that true leadership didn't come from commanding respect. It came from earning it. And Blake was earning it. One conversation at a time. One day, a few weeks into their new dynamic, Blake knocked on Tasha's office door. He had been thinking a lot about the direction the department was heading. He had been thinking about the future. Tasha looked up from her desk, her expression calm, but there was a spark of curiosity in her eyes. "Come in, Blake," she said. Blake stepped inside, his hands clasped in front of him. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady but unsure. "We've been through a lot these past few weeks, and I know I've still got a lot of work to do, but I wanted to ask you something." Tasha raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "I want to be part of this change," Blake said, his voice stronger now. "I know I've made mistakes, but I want to do better. I want to help you lead this department in a way that truly serves the people. I want to be a part of something bigger than myself." Tasha sat back in her chair, studying him. She could see the sincerity in his eyes. She could see the man he was becoming, and she knew that this was his moment. This was the moment where he stepped up and took responsibility, not just for his actions, but for the future. "I'm glad to hear that, Blake," Tasha said softly. "But this isn't going to be easy. It's going to take time. It's going to take trust. And it's going to take us both, working together, to make sure we don't slip back into old habits." Blake nodded, a sense of determination settling over him. "I'm ready," he said. And for the first time in a long time, Tasha believed him. The next few months were filled with challenges, but they also marked the beginning of something new. Blake and Tasha worked side by side, forging a path forward for the department, one that focused on justice, empathy, and equality. It wasn't always easy, but they were in it together. And as the days passed, Tasha began to realize that this was exactly what she had hoped for. A future where people didn't just follow the rules, but understood why those rules mattered. A future where everyone, no matter their background, was given the respect they deserved. She knew it wouldn't be perfect, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hope. And Blake? Blake was learning that true power wasn't about the badge on his chest or the uniform he wore. True power was in how you treated others, how you listened, and how you chose to change for the better. And for him, that was worth more than anything else. The weeks had passed since Tasha and Officer Blake had made their pact to move forward together, and now, the department was beginning to feel the shift. It wasn't immediate, but it was unmistakable. There were fewer whispers in the hallways, less tension in the air. People had started to notice the changes, subtle at first, but real. Tasha had brought in new policies, ones that emphasized equality, fairness, and understanding. They were still in the early stages, but already, the department felt different. Officer Blake had taken on a more active role, working alongside Tasha, and though his transformation hadn't been without difficulty, he had earned the respect of his colleagues through his actions. He had put in the work, attending community meetings, listening to people's concerns, and, most importantly, stepping back when necessary to let others speak. Tasha watched him from her office window, her gaze soft as she observed Blake speaking with an officer in the hallway. She had seen the way he had started to listen more than talk, the way his posture had changed. He was no longer the arrogant, dismissive officer who had once mocked her. He was becoming a better version of himself, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. But even as things seemed to be improving, Tasha knew the hardest work was still ahead. The department was large, and the culture wasn't going to change overnight. There would be setbacks, there would be resistance, but she was prepared for that. She had always known that true change took time, but it was worth the fight. One afternoon, Tasha received a call that would test everything she had worked for. A local community group had gathered outside the station, demanding justice for an incident that had occurred the previous week. It wasn't a simple case. A young man had been stopped by a police officer under questionable circumstances, and tensions were high. The media had already picked up the story, and protests were beginning to grow. Tasha's phone buzzed with a message. From Blake. He had been in the field that day, but he had heard the news. "We need to address this head-on," the message read. "I'll meet you in your office in 20 minutes. Tasha's fingers hovered over her phone, her thoughts racing. She knew the right thing to do, but this was going to be hard. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. When Blake arrived, they wasted no time. He was calm, but there was a new sense of urgency in his eyes. "We can't keep dodging the tough conversations," he said, his voice steady. "We need to meet with the community, hear their concerns, and make it clear that things are changing here. We can't afford to sit in our offices and pretend everything's fine." Tasha nodded, her mind already working through the logistics. She was grateful for Blake's support. They had come a long way, and now, they had the opportunity to make a real difference. The meeting with the community was scheduled for the following day. As Tasha stood before the crowd, she felt a wave of nervousness wash over her, but she steadied herself. She had earned this moment. She had fought for it. The crowd was larger than she had anticipated, and the tension was palpable. People were angry, frustrated, and many had come to demand accountability. Tasha stepped up to the podium, her gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. "I know many of you are angry," she began, her voice firm but compassionate. "And you have every right to be. We failed you, and I won't make excuses. But I'm here today to tell you that things are changing. We're listening, and we're committed to doing better. We will hold ourselves accountable, and we will ensure that justice is not just a word, but a practice." As she spoke, she could see the skepticism in their eyes, but there was something else there, too. A flicker of hope. Tasha continued, her voice unwavering. "This is just the beginning. We're making real changes in how we operate, how we serve you, and how we treat each other. It won't be easy, but we're in this together, and we're not going anywhere." The crowd was silent for a moment. Then a few voices spoke out, asking questions, demanding more. Tasha answered each one with patience, listening carefully, acknowledging their pain, and offering solutions. Blake stood by her side, his presence a silent show of support. It was the first time they had faced a challenge like this together, and it was clear that they were stronger for it. As the meeting came to a close, Tasha felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The journey wasn't over, but they had taken an important step forward. Blake turned to her as the crowd began to disperse. "You did good," he said quietly. "You handled it well." Tasha smiled, but her eyes were tired. "We did good," she corrected him. "It's not just about me. It's about all of us working together." Blake nodded, a sense of respect and admiration in his eyes. "I get it now," he said. "I really do." The two of them stood in silence for a moment, watching the last of the protesters walk away. It had been a long day, but it had also been a victorious one. They had faced adversity, but they had faced it together, and that was what mattered. Tasha knew that this was just one battle in a much larger war, but for the first time, she felt like they were on the right side. And that made all the difference. The weeks after the community meeting had been a whirlwind for Tasha and Blake. The department was starting to show the signs of the change they had fought for, but the road ahead was still long. Every day was a new challenge, each day requiring them to reaffirm their commitment to their new mission. Tasha had known that real transformation was not going to come easily. She had faced the resistance in the form of old habits, skepticism, and some outright hostility, but with every new hurdle, the department was beginning to feel like it was truly shifting. Blake was proving to be a more genuine ally than she had ever expected. There was a quiet determination about him now, one that wasn't rooted in the need to prove himself to others, but in a deep, personal desire to right the wrongs he had helped perpetuate. It was no longer about the badge he wore or the uniform. It was about doing what was right. Tasha admired that. He had come a long way. One afternoon, as Tasha sat at her desk, going through reports, she noticed the subtle change in the atmosphere of the office. It wasn't the tense, heavy air of the old days. There was a new sense of hope. More officers were coming forward with ideas. More officers were engaging in the new community initiatives. It was clear that they were buying into the vision she had for the department, and that felt like progress. Blake entered her office, knocking softly before stepping inside. "Got a minute?" he asked, his voice warm but serious. "Always," Tasha replied, looking up from her paperwork. "What's on your mind?" Blake hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking. You know how we've been talking about building trust with the community?" he said. "Well, I think it's time we do something more. Something bigger." Tasha raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" "I think we should hold a series of town hall meetings," Blake said, his tone decisive. "Not just one, but several, in different neighborhoods. Let's meet with the people directly, talk to them, hear their concerns in person. I mean really listen. And not just once, but on a regular basis. Let them know that this isn't just lip service. This is an ongoing commitment." Tasha leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping thoughtfully on the desk. She knew he was right. They had made progress, but they needed to take it a step further. They needed to create a bridge that connected the department to the community, not just for one day or one event, but continuously. "I like the sound of that," she said finally. "It's bold, but that's what we need. Let's do it." Blake smiled. "Great. I'll start organizing everything. We'll need to make sure we reach as many people as possible. This can't be just for show. It has to be genuine." Tasha nodded. "It will be. We'll make sure of it." Over the next few weeks, the town halls were scheduled, and the buzz began to spread. The department wasn't just talking about change. They were actively seeking it, step by step. On the first night of the town hall, Tasha found herself standing before a room full of community members, each with their own stories, concerns, and hopes for the future. The room was full, and the energy was palpable. She could feel the tension in the air as she walked up to the podium. These people had been hurt. They had been let down. But tonight, she hoped, would be the first step toward healing. As she began to speak, her voice calm but firm, she felt a sense of responsibility settle over her. "I know you've heard promises before," Tasha began. "I know you've been told that things will change, only to be let down again. But I am here to tell you that this time, we are going to do more than promise. We are going to listen. We are going to work with you, not just for you. This isn't just about words. This is about actions. And we are committed to showing you that we can be trusted." The room was silent as Tasha spoke. She could see the skepticism in their eyes, but she could also see something else, a flicker of hope. It was a start, and that was all she could ask for. After her speech, the floor was open to questions, and people took their turn at the microphone. Some asked tough questions, others shared their personal stories. But Tasha didn't shy away. She listened. She answered as honestly as she could. Some of the questions were uncomfortable. Some of the answers she gave didn't come easily, but she knew that was the point. It wasn't supposed to be easy. It was supposed to be real. As the meeting drew to a close, Blake stood by her side, his presence a quiet strength. They had made it through the first night, and it felt like they had made a real connection with the community. This was just the beginning. The next town hall was just a week away, and already, the word was spreading. The department was showing up. They were listening, and they were changing. The following days were filled with more meetings, more outreach, and more conversations. Blake was becoming more and more involved, and Tasha could see how much he had grown. He was no longer just the officer who had been in charge of maintaining order. He was becoming an advocate for change, a true ally. The work wasn't easy, and there were days when Tasha felt overwhelmed. But each small step forward, each new conversation, each act of listening, brought them closer to their goal. It wasn't about fixing everything overnight. It was about showing up, being present, and doing the hard work every single day. And Tasha knew, deep down, that they were on the right path. It was no longer about proving something to the community or to themselves. It was about creating a department that was built on trust, respect, and a commitment to doing what was right. The weeks that followed the town hall meetings felt like a new chapter for both Tasha and Blake. The department was gradually beginning to transform, but the journey was still far from over. There were moments when Tasha felt the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her, but she also felt a quiet sense of hope every time she saw the officers engage in more meaningful conversations with the community. They were no longer just officers in uniforms. They were people working to build trust, and it was showing. Blake, in particular, had taken on a role that was more than he had ever expected. He was no longer the officer people avoided in the halls. He was becoming a leader in his own right, someone who people turned to for guidance. Tasha couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in his growth. It hadn't been easy for him. He had come from a place of arrogance and self-importance, and now, he was learning what it meant to be truly humble. It wasn't just about following orders or giving commands anymore. It was about listening, understanding, and doing the right thing, no matter how difficult. One afternoon, as Tasha sat in her office, reviewing reports, Blake knocked lightly on her door. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Always," Tasha replied with a smile, motioning for him to come in. Blake stepped inside, holding a few papers in his hands. "I've been thinking," he began, his tone serious yet calm, "about the next step. We've made a lot of progress, but we need to keep going. We can't let this be just another moment in time that fades away. We need something more permanent, something that reinforces the changes we're making." Tasha looked at him, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" "I think it's time we start a mentorship program," Blake said, his voice steady. "A program where officers can connect with the community, where they can learn from each other, share experiences. It'll help break down the barriers, make the officers more accountable, and allow them to gain the trust they need to truly serve the people." Tasha nodded thoughtfully, considering his idea. "I like it," she said. "But we'll need to make sure it's not just a one-time event. It has to be a long-term commitment, something the officers will take seriously." Blake smiled. "Exactly. We can start small, but we need to make sure it's something that grows over time." Over the next few weeks, Blake and Tasha worked together to design the mentorship program. They reached out to community leaders, asking for their input, making sure the program would meet the needs of the people they were trying to serve. It was a collaborative effort, one that would require trust on both sides. When the program finally launched, Tasha and Blake stood in front of a group of eager officers and community members. There was a sense of anticipation in the air. This was the next step in the department's transformation. This wasn't just a meeting or a one-time conversation. It was an ongoing relationship. "This is our chance to build real, lasting change," Tasha said, addressing the group. "It's not just about following orders. It's about understanding each other, building trust, and working together to create a safer, more just community." Blake stood beside her, his presence a quiet but powerful show of support. "We've all made mistakes, but we're here to learn, to grow, and to make things right. This program is a step toward that. It's about listening, and it's about making sure that we're held accountable for our actions." The officers and community members exchanged looks, some still skeptical, others more hopeful. Tasha knew that change wasn't going to happen overnight, but this was a start. This was the moment when the department truly began to forge a new path. Over the next few months, the mentorship program flourished. Officers were paired with community leaders, local businesses, and families, all working together to break down the walls that had divided them for so long. It wasn't easy. There were times when old prejudices reared their ugly heads, when tensions flared, but Tasha and Blake kept pushing forward. They were committed to seeing this through, no matter the challenges. Slowly but surely, The officers began to change. They started to see the community as partners, not adversaries. They learned about the struggles people faced on a daily basis, and they began to understand the importance of empathy in their roles. Blake, in particular, had come a long way. He had started out unsure of how he could truly make a difference, but now he was actively working to build relationships, to make sure that people felt heard and valued. Tasha watched it all unfold, knowing that the road ahead was still long, but the progress was undeniable. One evening, as she and Blake sat in her office, reviewing the success of the program so far, Blake turned to her with a smile. "I think we're doing something good here," he said, his voice filled with genuine pride. "We've come a long way." Tasha looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "We've come a long way," she agreed. "But we've still got a long way to go. And we'll keep going. Together." And for the first time in a long time, Tasha truly believed it. This was just the beginning. There was still so much more to do, but they were on the right path. And that was enough to keep them moving forward. Months passed, and the department was beginning to look like something entirely new. Tasha watched with quiet pride as the changes she and Blake had fought for continued to take shape. The mentorship program had expanded, and officers were not only building stronger relationships with the community, but also with each other. The work was far from easy, but it was clear that the foundation they were building was one that could stand the test of time. Blake had grown into his role in ways Tasha had never imagined. He was no longer the officer who walked into the room with a sense of entitlement. He was the officer who walked in ready to listen, ready to learn, and ready to take responsibility for his actions. Tasha saw the transformation in him every day, and it gave her hope for the future. But despite the progress, there were still moments when Tasha felt the weight of the work she had ahead of her. As much as things had changed, there were still people in the department who resisted the new direction. There were still officers who clung to the old ways, who didn't fully understand what it meant to serve the community, not control it. Tasha knew she couldn't change everyone overnight. Change would take time, and it would take effort from everyone involved. One afternoon, as Tasha sat in her office, reviewing the results of the latest community outreach efforts, Blake walked in, his face serious. "Got a minute?" he asked, his voice carrying a weight she wasn't used to hearing. "Always," Tasha replied, looking up from her paperwork. Blake closed the door behind him and walked over to her desk, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "We've hit a rough patch," he said, his voice steady. "Some of the officers are starting to push back. They don't like the direction we're heading. They're questioning the changes we've made." Tasha felt a twinge of frustration, but she remained calm. She had expected this moment to come. Change was never easy, especially when it challenged the status quo. "What are they saying?" she asked. Blake sighed, his gaze shifting to the floor for a moment before meeting her eyes. "They feel like we're losing control. They think that by listening to the community, we're giving up our authority. They don't understand that we're not trying to control the people we serve. We're trying to build a partnership with them." Tasha leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She had known there would be resistance. She had known there would be people who didn't fully understand the vision they were working toward. But hearing it from Blake, someone who had come so far, made it feel like a deeper challenge. "I don't know what to do, Tasha," Blake continued. "I thought we were making progress, but it feels like some of them are slipping back into their old habits." Tasha took a deep breath and looked at Blake. She had to remain strong, not just for the department, but for the community that was watching, waiting for the change they had promised. "This is going to be one of the hardest parts of this journey," she said softly. "We're not just fighting for change within the department. We're fighting for a shift in mindset. It's going to take time, and it's going to take persistence. But I believe in this. I believe in the work we've done so far, and I believe in the future we're building." Blake nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. He had been in the trenches with her for so long that he had started to doubt whether the vision they shared was truly achievable. But hearing Tasha speak with such conviction gave him the strength he needed to keep going. "You're right," he said, his voice more confident now. "We've come too far to stop now. We can't let a few officers derail the progress we've made." Tasha smiled, her eyes focused and determined. "Exactly. We'll have to keep pushing. We'll have to keep showing them why this is important, why the work we're doing matters." The next day, Tasha called a department-wide meeting. She knew it was time to address the concerns head-on, to remind everyone why they had committed to this path in the first place. As she stood before the room of officers, Tasha felt the familiar sense of responsibility settle in her chest. She had worked hard to get to this point, and now, it was time to remind them all of the bigger picture. I know that some of you are struggling with the changes we've been making. Tasha began, her voice calm yet firm. I know it's not easy to shift the way we've always done things. But I'm here to remind you that we are here to serve. We are here to protect. We are here to listen. This is not about losing control. It's about building a partnership with the community. It's about creating trust. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's hard. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. She could feel the eyes of the officers on her, some still skeptical, others more open. But she knew this was the moment they needed. I didn't take this job because it was easy. I didn't take this job because I wanted power. I took this job because I believe in change. I believe in doing things the right way. And I believe that if we keep working together, we will get there. But we can't do it alone. We need each and every one of you. We need you to be a part of this transformation. There was a long silence in the room, and then, one by one, the officers began to nod. Tasha could see the hesitation in their eyes, but she could also see the flicker of understanding. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a while, Tasha felt that familiar sense of hope. It wasn't over. The fight wasn't done, but they were on the right path, and they weren't turning back. It had been months since Tasha and Blake had set their course, and while progress was visible, there was still so much to do. The department had transformed in many ways, but there was a tension in the air. It wasn't always the type of change that everyone was ready for. Some officers were embracing the new culture, but others, though quieter about it, still resisted. Tasha knew it was a long road ahead, but she couldn't afford to let the resistance derail their progress. She had always been prepared for this. As she walked through the station one morning, she felt a shift in the air. Blake had been pushing harder, trying to bring the skeptical officers on board with the changes. He was in his element now, moving with purpose, his posture a testament to the growth he had made. The mentorship program was still flourishing, with officers spending more time in the community and learning from the very people they were meant to protect. It was slow work, but it was happening. Blake had become one of the most vocal advocates for the changes within the department. He was now the one leading discussions, challenging officers to rethink old habits, to reframe their approach. He had come a long way from the officer who once couldn't see the bigger picture. Tasha caught up with him in the hallway one afternoon. Blake, I've been hearing a lot of positive feedback about the mentorship program, she said, smiling slightly. You've been doing good work. Blake turned to her, his eyes filled with that quiet determination she had come to admire. It's not just me, Tasha, he said. It's all of us. The program's success depends on everyone. We've been showing them how to build real trust with the community. But there's still some pushback. We've got to keep moving forward. Tasha nodded. She knew he was right. They had come so far, but change wasn't a linear path. How's the response from the department? She asked. Blake's expression grew more serious. Better than expected, but there are still a few who don't fully get it. They're uncomfortable with the level of accountability we're demanding. They're used to doing things the old way. They're afraid we're going to compromise our authority by working so closely with the community. Tasha sighed. It was always the same challenge. The delicate balance of power and trust. We're not compromising anything, Blake, she said firmly. We're just doing things the right way. Blake's expression softened as he met her eyes. I know. I just don't want us to lose momentum. Tasha placed a hand on his shoulder, offering him reassurance. We won't, but it's going to take persistence. We've already made so much progress, and it's going to pay off in the long run. Later that week, Tasha called another department-wide meeting. The resistance had to be addressed head-on, and she knew she couldn't afford to ignore it. She stood at the front of the room, her gaze sweeping over the officers who had gathered. There were still a few skeptical faces among the crowd, but she couldn't let that deter her. I know that not all of you are comfortable with the changes we've made, she began, her voice steady and commanding. And I understand that. Change is hard, especially when it challenges everything you've known. But I'm here to tell you that the way we've been doing things isn't working. We've seen the consequences of that. We've seen the community's distrust. We've seen the mistakes we've made. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in. She wasn't backing down. Not now. We're not asking you to abandon your authority. We're asking you to recognize that real power comes from respect, from listening, from working with the people we serve. This isn't just about us. This is about the community. And we're not just here to enforce the law. We're here to make sure that the law serves everyone equally. She glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of those who had been hesitant. I'm not asking for blind loyalty. I'm asking for your trust. And I'm asking you to trust the work we've already done. We've made mistakes, but we've learned from them. And we're going to keep learning. There was a long silence in the room. Tasha could feel the tension, the uncertainty, but she didn't flinch. She had said what needed to be said. Slowly, one by one, the officers began to nod. Some didn't look convinced, but some did. That was enough for Tasha. We have a choice to make, she continued. We can either keep doing things the way we always have and expect different results, or we can be part of something bigger, a department that leads with integrity, with fairness, and with compassion. It's not going to be easy, but I know we can do it. The room was still quiet, but it wasn't the same oppressive silence. It was different. It felt like a pause, a moment of reflection. And that, Tasha realized, was the first step toward real change. After the meeting, Blake walked up to her, his face thoughtful. You were right, he said quietly. We've got to keep pushing, no matter what. Tasha smiled at him. Exactly. We're in this together. And we're not giving up. Over the next few weeks, the department's momentum didn't slow. Tasha and Blake continued to challenge the officers, pushing them to engage with the community in new ways. It wasn't always easy, but it was working. The officers who had once resisted began to change their approach. They started to see the impact of their actions, and they started to understand why this work mattered. It wasn't about losing authority. It was about gaining something far more valuable: trust. The shift in the department was becoming undeniable. It was slow, but it was steady. And Tasha knew, deep down, that the change they had set in motion would be one that would last. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like they were finally on the right track. The shift within the department was becoming more apparent as the months passed. Tasha watched as officers, once reluctant to embrace the changes she had championed, now began to take more initiative. The mentorship program had proven to be a turning point. Officers were connecting with the community on a deeper level, and Tasha knew this was the foundation of real change. Still, there were days when she felt the weight of the work ahead. Some officers had come a long way, but others remained entrenched in old habits. She knew the challenges were far from over, but there was a quiet satisfaction in seeing the positive outcomes that were beginning to surface. Blake, too, had made remarkable strides. He was no longer the man he had been when he first walked into her office, unsure of how to navigate the new direction they were taking. He had become a key ally in the department's transformation. More than that, Blake had found a new sense of purpose. He had learned to listen, truly listen, to the people he was meant to protect. And with each passing day, his confidence grew, not in his authority, but in his ability to foster genuine change. Tasha stood in her office one morning, looking out the window at the city below. It had been a week since the last town hall, and the feedback had been overwhelmingly positive. But Tasha knew that the real work wasn't in the meetings or the speeches. The real work was in the day-to-day actions, the small moments that added up over time. She had been on this journey for a while now, and she knew better than to let the victories, no matter how big, distract her from the work still to be done. Blake knocked on the door, his presence a constant source of support. Got a minute? He asked, his voice calm and steady. Always, Tasha replied, turning to face him with a smile. He stepped inside, holding a folder in his hands. We've got some new challenges ahead, he said, handing her the folder. We've got an upcoming audit of the department's procedures, and there are some concerns about the direction we're heading. Some of the higher-ups are asking questions. Tasha took the folder and glanced at the papers inside. She had anticipated this. Change, real change, always comes with scrutiny. I expected this, she said, her tone measured. But it doesn't change the fact that we're moving forward. We're doing the right thing. Blake nodded, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. I know, but there's still a lot of resistance. It's not just the officers who are having a hard time. Some of the upper management are still holding on to the old ways. They're not fully convinced that this shift is necessary. Tasha set the folder down on her desk and crossed her arms. She had always known that her efforts wouldn't be embraced by everyone. But this was the test, the real test of their commitment to change. We're not here to please them, Blake, she said firmly. We're here to build something better. And sometimes, that means standing up to those who resist progress, even if they hold positions of power. We've come too far to back down now. Blake looked at her, his expression thoughtful. You're right, he said. But it's going to be hard. There's a lot of pressure. Pressure is part of the job, Tasha replied, her voice steady. But we can handle it. We've already faced harder battles. Blake took a deep breath and smiled, his confidence returning. You're right. We've got this. Over the next few weeks, Tasha and Blake worked tirelessly to address the concerns raised by upper management. The audit was a challenging process, but it was also an opportunity to showcase the positive changes they had made. Tasha was determined to make sure that the department's progress couldn't be dismissed or overlooked. She knew they had made mistakes along the way, but she also knew that they were learning, growing, and committed to doing better. As the audit progressed, Tasha and Blake held meetings with the auditors, explaining the new policies, the mentorship program, and the ways in which they had begun to rebuild trust with the community. It was clear that the auditors, while still skeptical, were beginning to see the value in what they were doing. By the end of the process, the results were more favorable than Tasha had anticipated. The department was praised for the positive changes, and while there were areas for improvement, it was clear that Tasha and Blake had made significant strides in reshaping the department. Tasha felt a sense of relief, but she also knew that this was just another step in a much longer journey. She had never expected change to be easy, and she knew that the work was never truly done. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like they were on the right track. As Tasha stood outside the building later that afternoon, watching the city bustle around her, she felt a quiet pride. There would always be challenges, always be resistance, but the work they had started couldn't be undone. They had built something real, something lasting. And that, to Tasha, was all that mattered. As the months passed, Tasha and Blake found themselves entrenched in the daily grind of maintaining the momentum they had worked so hard to build. The department was no longer just a place of authority. It had become a place of change, a place where officers were learning to connect with the community they served in meaningful ways. Tasha had expected the road to be challenging, but each victory, no matter how small, kept her motivated. Blake, too, had found a new sense of purpose. He was no longer the officer who simply followed orders. He was now a leader, one who inspired others to do better, to be better. But even with the progress they had made, there were days when the weight of the work ahead felt almost unbearable. Some of the resistance had faded, but there were still officers who preferred the old ways, still moments when Tasha had to remind herself why they were doing this. One afternoon, Tasha and Blake found themselves in a meeting with a group of senior officers. The tension in the room was palpable. Some of the officers had come around, but others were still holding onto the traditional methods of policing. Tasha could feel the divide, the quiet skepticism in the air. We've made a lot of progress, Tasha said, her voice calm but firm. But we still have a long way to go. The work we've done with the community is just the beginning. We've made some changes, but it's going to take time before we see the full impact. It's about consistency, about showing up every day and proving that we're committed to making real change. Blake spoke up, his voice steady and confident. The mentorship program is just one part of it. We're creating relationships that didn't exist before. We're showing the community that we're here to listen, here to serve, not control. One of the senior officers, a man who had been with the department for over 20 years, spoke up, his voice laced with skepticism. I understand what you're saying, but the community isn't going to change overnight. They don't trust us. And no matter how many outreach programs we do, that's not going to fix everything. We need to be more firm, more assertive. Tasha met his gaze, unflinching. I disagree, she said calmly. We've been firm. We've been assertive. And it hasn't worked. We're at a crossroads. We can keep doing things the old way, but that's not going to solve the problems we're facing. We need to lead with respect, not authority. The room fell silent. Tasha could feel the weight of the moment. This was the conversation they had been avoiding. The real test. We're not asking anyone to give up their authority, Blake added. But we have to recognize that authority doesn't mean control. It means responsibility. It means accountability. And right now, we're not holding ourselves accountable to the community. We're holding ourselves accountable to outdated methods. The senior officer, still skeptical, crossed his arms. I get that you want to make things better, but it's hard to believe that just talking to the community is going to fix everything. Tasha nodded. It's not just about talking. It's about listening. It's about making real connections. When you listen, really listen, you start to understand why things are the way they are. And then, you start to see how you can make things better. But it's going to take work. It's going to take time. The room was quiet again, but this time, it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't filled with resistance. It was filled with contemplation. After a long pause, the senior officer spoke again, this time with less conviction. I don't know. I'm still not sure this is the right way. Then let's continue the conversation, Tasha said, her voice steady. We don't have all the answers, but we're working on it. Together. And if you're not willing to try, then we're not going to get anywhere. There was a long silence, and Tasha could feel the tension in the air. But then, one by one, the other officers in the room began to speak. They weren't fully on board, but they weren't opposed either. They wanted to see where this would go. They wanted to give it a chance. Tasha and Blake left the meeting feeling a small but important victory. The resistance wasn't gone, but it was softening. They were making progress, even if it wasn't as fast as they had hoped. As Tasha sat at her desk later that day, reflecting on the meeting, she couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. The road ahead was still long, and there would be setbacks, but they were making a real impact. Blake knocked on her door, stepping inside with a grin. We're making progress, he said, his tone light but confident. Tasha looked up from her paperwork, her expression thoughtful. We are, but there's still a long way to go. Blake sat down in the chair across from her. It's been a long journey, but we're getting there. I think they're starting to see what we're doing. The community is starting to see it too. Tasha smiled, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. Yeah, we've come a long way, but we're not done yet. They both sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on the work they had done and the work still ahead of them. It wasn't perfect, but they were on the right path. And for the first time in a long time, Tasha felt hopeful. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but she knew they were moving forward. Together, the atmosphere at the department had started to shift in subtle ways. Tasha and Blake were no longer just fighting to prove themselves. The foundation they had laid was strong enough that now, the real challenge was maintaining the momentum. Each day, they saw small signs of progress. Officers who had once been skeptical were beginning to embrace the changes. They were becoming more active in the community, attending outreach programs, and most importantly, engaging in open dialogues with the people they served. Tasha stood in the middle of the bustling station one morning, watching as officers filed in, their faces more relaxed than she had ever seen them before. It was a tangible sign that things were different. She could see it in their eyes. They no longer looked at their role through a lens of authority and control. They were beginning to see themselves as part of the community, not separate from it. Blake approached her, his usual calm demeanor masking the sense of pride that had been growing in him. Things are really starting to come together, aren't they? He said, a slight smile tugging at his lips. Tasha looked at him, her own pride swelling in her chest. Yeah, it feels like we're making a real difference. She paused for a moment, reflecting on how far they had come. It hadn't been easy, but they were finally seeing the fruits of their labor. Blake looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. But we've got to keep going, right? We can't let this be the end. There are still so many people who don't believe in what we're doing. We need to keep pushing forward. Tasha nodded. She knew the work was far from over. There were still people in the department, and even in the community, who were skeptical. They had seen enough empty promises and failed reforms to be wary. But Tasha had learned. That change didn't happen overnight. It happened one step at a time, and every step they took together was a step in the right direction. We will, she said firmly. But we can't do it alone. We need everyone to be on board. It's not just about us anymore. It's about the entire department. The whole community. Blake looked at her, the weight of her words settling in. You're right. It's about everyone. We've got to get them all to believe in the change we're making. Later that week, Tasha sat down with the senior officers once again. She knew it was time to confront the remaining doubts head-on. They couldn't afford to keep tiptoeing around the resistance. They had made incredible strides, but now they needed to ensure that everyone was on the same page. The room was quiet as Tasha addressed the group. We've made progress, she began, her voice steady and commanding. But we still have a long road ahead. There are still people who don't fully understand the direction we're going. There are still people who are resistant to change. But we cannot allow those voices to define our future. One of the senior officers, the one who had been most vocal in his opposition to their new methods, shifted in his seat. Tasha could see the tension in his posture, but she didn't let it deter her. I know that this isn't easy. I know that change is uncomfortable. But this isn't about us. This is about the people we serve. We owe it to them to do better. And if we can't do that, if we can't step up, then we're not doing our job. The room was silent for a long moment. Tasha could see the wheels turning in the officers' minds. She could see the hesitation, but also the curiosity. They were listening, and that was the most important part. We're not asking you to give up your authority, Tasha continued, her tone softening, but still firm. We're asking you to lead with integrity. We're asking you to show the community that we can be trusted, that we're here to protect, to serve, and to listen. The senior officer who had previously been most resistant finally spoke up. I still don't know if this will work, Tasha, he said, his voice low. I've seen what happens when we show weakness. I've seen what happens when we let people think they can walk all over us. Tasha met his gaze, her expression unwavering. This isn't about weakness, she said quietly. This is about strength. Real strength. Strength that comes from listening. Strength that comes from building trust, not demanding it. The officer sat back in his chair, his arms crossed. And what if they don't listen? He asked. What if they just take advantage of us? Then we'll keep listening, Tasha replied. And we'll keep building. One conversation at a time. One relationship at a time. The room was still for a moment. And then, slowly, one by one, the officers began to nod. Tasha could see that the seed had been planted. They might not all be convinced, but they were willing to give it a chance. As the meeting ended, Blake stood beside her, his expression reflective. You did good, he said quietly. They're starting to come around. Tasha smiled faintly. We're all starting to come around. The next few weeks were filled with more outreach, more conversations, and more efforts to rebuild trust. The department was beginning to feel like a community, not just a group of officers and civilians. There was still work to be done, but for the first time in a long time, Tasha felt confident in the future. She had known that this journey wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that they were on the right track. The path ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: they were no longer walking it alone. The department had reached a point where the work felt more ingrained in the daily routine than ever before. Tasha watched as the officers, once so resistant, now engaged in community initiatives without hesitation. Blake had continued his transformation, no longer just a follower of orders, but a genuine leader who inspired those around him. There was a quiet pride in the air, a sense of accomplishment that filled the department, but Tasha knew better than to rest on their laurels. Change, real change, was never easy, and it required constant effort. One morning, as Tasha sat in her office reviewing the latest progress reports, she received an unexpected visitor. It was one of the officers who had been particularly vocal in his opposition when they first started making changes. He had been quiet in the recent months, which Tasha had taken as a good sign, but now, he was standing in her doorway, his face unreadable. Got a minute? He asked, his tone hesitant. Of course, Tasha said, gesturing for him to come in. The officer stepped inside, his eyes not meeting hers immediately. There was something about his posture that made Tasha pause. He seemed unsure, and she couldn't help but wonder what was on his mind. I wanted to talk to you about something, he said, sitting down across from her. I've been thinking a lot about the direction we've been heading as a department. I know I didn't agree with a lot of it at first, but I've seen some things recently that made me rethink my position. Tasha nodded, waiting for him to continue. She had always been open to feedback, especially from those who had initially disagreed. It was part of the process. What kind of things? She asked gently. Well, the way the community is reacting. It's different now, he said, his voice soft but filled with a certain sincerity. I've been working more closely with some of the community leaders, and I've seen how much they appreciate the effort we're putting in. I've seen how they're starting to trust us again. It's actually kind of amazing. Tasha smiled slightly, pleased by what she was hearing. I'm glad to hear that, she said. It's been a long road, but it's moments like these that remind me why we're doing this. The officer hesitated for a moment, his eyes searching hers. I just wanted to apologize, he said quietly. I've been hard on you and Blake, and I didn't understand what you were trying to do. I see it now. I see how much you care about the community, and I see how much work you've put into this. I'm sorry I didn't get it sooner. Tasha was taken aback by his apology. She had expected some resistance, but she hadn't expected such an honest admission. She could see the weight of the past few months in his eyes, the realization of how far they had all come. It's okay, Tasha said, her voice soft but steady. This isn't about being right or wrong. It's about growth. We're all learning, and sometimes it takes a while to see the bigger picture. What matters is that you're here now, and that you're willing to be part of the change. The officer nodded, his expression sincere. I want to help, he said. I want to be part of what we're building here. I didn't realize how important it was until now. It's never too late to be a part of it, Tasha replied with a smile. And we need everyone. We need all of you. As the officer left her office, Tasha sat back in her chair, reflecting on the conversation. She had always known that not everyone would embrace the changes immediately, but hearing someone come forward and admit their doubts, then their willingness to change, was more than she had hoped for. It wasn't just about the big moments, the town halls, the meetings with community leaders. It was about the individual moments, the small shifts in mindset that would eventually lead to lasting change. That afternoon, Tasha and Blake met in her office to discuss the next steps. It's happening, Tasha said, a sense of relief in her voice. People are starting to see what we've been trying to do. It's not just lip service anymore. They're getting it. Blake smiled, his eyes reflecting the pride he felt. I knew it would take time, but seeing it all come together, it's worth it. It is, Tasha agreed. But we can't stop now. We've made progress, but there's still work to do. We need to keep showing up every day, keep building those connections, keep earning trust. Blake nodded. I'm with you. We'll keep pushing forward. Together. The next few months saw continued progress. The department was becoming a place of real change, a place where officers were no longer just a symbol of authority, but a part of the community they served. The mentorship program continued to grow, and more officers were involved in community outreach efforts. Tasha felt a sense of pride in what they had built, but she knew there was still more to do. The road to true transformation was long, but with every step they took, the department was becoming a better place. It wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. And Tasha had learned that, step by step, they were making a difference. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. The days turned into weeks, and Tasha couldn't help but feel a deep sense of accomplishment as she watched the department continue to evolve. It wasn't just about the programs, the meetings, or the policies they had implemented. It was about the daily interactions, the small moments where officers showed up with integrity, the times they listened more than they spoke, and the quiet change in the way the community viewed them. Blake, who had once been unsure of his place in all of this, had now fully embraced the role of a leader. He had become a mentor not just to the younger officers, but to the ones who had once resisted the changes, guiding them with patience and understanding. The connection he had built with the community was stronger than ever, and Tasha could see the difference it made. She had always believed in the power of listening, but seeing Blake's transformation confirmed for her that this was the way forward. It was early one morning when Tasha sat in her office, reviewing the latest reports from the community outreach programs. The numbers were promising. More people were engaging with the department, and fewer complaints were being filed. She could feel the shift, the sense of trust that had been missing for so long. Just as she set the reports down, Blake entered the room, his face lit up with a quiet excitement. We've got some news, he said, his voice filled with optimism. The community leaders we've been working with, they want to partner with us on a citywide initiative. They're ready to take the next step with us. Tasha's heart swelled with pride. That's incredible, she said, standing up to face him. What kind of initiative? Blake smiled, a sense of hope in his eyes. It's a mentorship and youth empowerment program. They want us to lead it, to help guide the younger generation, to give them the support and opportunities they've been missing. They trust us now, Tasha. They really do. Tasha's smile mirrored Blake's. She could hardly believe how far they had come. It was moments like these that made all the struggles worth it. This is exactly what we've been working toward, she said, her voice filled with emotion. This is where the real change happens. Blake nodded, his expression serious. I know. This is just the beginning. But it's a big step. It's everything we've been fighting for. The following weeks were filled with planning, meetings, and collaboration. Tasha and Blake worked closely with the community leaders, shaping the mentorship. and youth empowerment program into something that could make a real, lasting difference. The initiative was not just about offering support. It was about building bridges, creating a sense of belonging, and showing the younger generation that they had value, that their voices mattered. It was a massive undertaking, but for the first time in a long time, Tasha felt like the department was truly on the right path. The community was no longer just a passive recipient of their actions. They were partners in this journey, and that made all the difference. As the program launched, Tasha stood at the front of a crowded room, surrounded by community leaders, officers, and young people eager to take part. Blake stood beside her, his presence a reminder of how far they had come. It wasn't just the two of them anymore. It was everyone in the department, everyone in the community, working together. "This is our chance to make a real difference," Tasha said, her voice steady and full of conviction. "We're here to empower you, to show you that your future is in your hands. This isn't just about us teaching you. It's about all of us learning from each other, growing together. And we're here for the long haul." The room was filled with applause, and for a brief moment, Tasha allowed herself to soak it in. This was what she had been fighting for. This was what Blake had been fighting for. This was what they had all been fighting for. Over the next few months, the program began to take off. Officers and young people alike were forging bonds, sharing stories, and building trust. The walls that had once separated the community from the department were slowly but surely coming down. The program was more than just an initiative. It was a movement, a testament to what could be achieved when people chose to work together. Tasha and Blake continued to lead with integrity, but it wasn't just about their leadership anymore. It was about the collective effort of everyone involved, the shared commitment to making their community a better place for all. One evening, as Tasha sat at her desk reflecting on everything they had accomplished, Blake walked in, a tired but satisfied look on his face. "It's happening, Tasha," he said quietly. "It's really happening." Tasha smiled, a deep sense of fulfillment settling over her. "It is," she said, her voice soft but filled with pride. "But we're not done yet." Blake nodded. "No, we're not. But we've come a long way." As they stood together, looking out over the city they had fought so hard to change, Tasha felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead was still long, but they were on the right path, and that was enough. They had built something real, something lasting, and no matter what came next, they knew they had the strength to keep moving forward. Together,